You ever wonder why, after spending time with certain people, you just feel drained? Not just tired, not just peopled out, but like something real in you got pulled, tugged, maybe even chipped away. That's what Alan Watts was trying to tell us, long before the age of social media and non-stop group chats and performative brunches. Long before introvert burnout was a meme and vibes became a personality metric. See, Watts didn't just wax poetic about enlightenment.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
He got real about what it feels like when you start actually waking up, to the world around you. And it's not all peace and incense and sitting cross-legged on a mountaintop. Sometimes it's straight up uncomfortable, especially when you realize how much of life is a performance. He tells this story, a monk, deeply awake, who says, "I live alone." But he doesn't mean it the way we usually think. He doesn't mean physically alone. He means internally, not tangled up in the noise, the personas, the expectations, not constantly yanked into everyone else's projections and stories. That's the kind of solitude Watts says is necessary for an awakened soul. And here's where it gets juicy. Because once you start peeling back your own layers, once you stop performing and start observing, you can't unsee it. You start noticing the masks. Everywhere. The person laughing a little too loudly at the party. The forced small talk that leaves your chest tight. The tension in a room when someone enters, heavy with stress they haven't even acknowledged. Watts wasn't just talking theory. He was warning us, being awake means being sensitive. Not in a weak way. In a tuned-in way. Like a living antenna for emotion, truth, and energy. And when you're that tuned in, crowds aren't just exhausting. They're overwhelming. It's not that you don't like people. It's that you start absorbing everything they're not saying. Their anxiety, their bitterness, their fear of being seen, their desperation to be liked. You feel it in your bones. And before long, you're wondering why you're so tired when no one actually said anything to you. But deep down, you know, you didn't just talk. You felt everyone in the room. Unfiltered. That's why so many awakened people find themselves stepping back. Not because they are broken. Not because they are antisocial, but because they are finally aligned enough to realize what's nourishing and what's not. And mass social interaction, most of it isn't. It's loud. It's coded. It's layered with so much ego and expectation that genuine connection becomes a rare, glittering thing. And yet, we still crave connection, don't we? That's a paradox Watts brings us into. We want to be with others, but we also want truth, authenticity. And those two desires collide when everyone around us is wearing a mask. That's why solitude becomes a lifeline. It's not a rejection of the world. It's a return to your own frequency. It's the only place quiet enough for you to actually hear yourself again. And here's the magic. Once you've reconnected to yourself, really reconnected, you show up in the world differently. You're not needing from others. You're meeting them. You're not scanning for cues to fit in. You're bringing your own stillness, your own clarity. You become a mirror, and that can be terrifying for people who aren't ready to see themselves. But for those who are, oh, it's electric. Because when two conscious beings meet, no masks, no scripts, no performance, it's rare, but it's unmistakable. Conversation becomes communion. Presence becomes power. And suddenly, connection is no longer draining. It's expansive. It charges you instead of hollowing you out. Watts says most people aren't actually relating. They are role-playing. The parent, the colleague, the joker, the victim, the teacher, the strong one. All these subtle performances, scripted in survival and shame, passed down like family recipes no one questions. But the awakened person, they see it, they feel it, and after a while, being around it starts to hurt. Because pretending hurts. Even when you're not the one pretending. So what do? You retreat, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. You water your roots. You tend your own flame, because you have to if you want to stay awake. You create space, not because you hate people, but because you love yourself enough to stop leaking energy into places that don't hold you in return. And here's the kicker. The more you protect that space, the more sacred it becomes. You stop tolerating half-truths and emotional bypassing. You stop over-explaining your boundaries. You stop trying to fix other people's discomfort just because they haven't met themselves yet. Instead, you find peace in the pause, in the quiet, in your own breath, in the long walks with no destination, in the silence where your soul finally gets a chance to speak. And when you re-emerge, when you do decide to be around people, it's from a place of fullness, of offering, not needing. You're no longer grasping for validation or energy. You're simply being. Watts would call this the beginning of real freedom. Not the kind sold in slogans or self-help books, but the quiet revolution of realizing you are already whole. You don't need the world's permission to exist as you are. And when you really know that, you stop needing the crowd to reflect your worth. You become the light others grow toward. And here's what's wild. Your solitude, the very thing you thought was separating you, actually becomes a source of your deepest connection. Because now, when someone else meets you in that same presence, it's not just a conversation. It's recognition, soul to soul. No noise, no clutter, just truth. That's why you can't be around too many people. Not all the time. Not when you've woken up to the real. It's not about hating humanity. It's about loving yourself enough to step back from the unconscious hum of it all. Because until the world learns to take off its mask, someone's got to hold the mirror. Someone's got to remember how to breathe. Someone's got to keep the fire alive, not the fire of noise and hustle and applause, but the fire of truth. And maybe, just maybe, that someone is you. So don't apologize for needing space. Don't shrink your sensitivity. Don't dilute your awareness just to keep things comfortable. You're not broken. You're awake. And in a world still half asleep, that might just be the bravest thing you can be. If this hit home for you, take a breath. Take a walk. Take a day for yourself if you need it. Then share this with someone who understands, or someone who needs to. Because the more of us who learn to honor our solitude, the better chance we have at building a world that's real. And here's the thing, Alan, what's understood, maybe better than most. Solitude doesn't make you less human. It makes you more. Because solitude isn't the absence of connection. It's the birthplace of real connection. We live in a culture that glorifies noise, that rewards extroversion, that tells you if you're not constantly socializing, networking, building your tribe, or putting yourself out there, you're falling behind. That quiet is for the lonely, and loneliness is something to be fixed fast. But Watts flips that on its head. He says, no, real aloneness isn't a symptom of emptiness. It's a gateway to depth. It's not loneliness if you're full of your own presence. It's not emptiness if you're finally hearing your own voice uninterrupted. See, most people fear being alone not because it's uncomfortable, but because it's unfamiliar. When you take away the job title, the friend group, the obligations, the schedule, what's left? Just you. And if you haven't met that version of you, the one beneath all the layers, it can be scary, like staring into a mirror you've never really looked at before. But that's where the awakening begins. It's in the stillness, the silence, the moments when there's nothing left to perform for, when you're not trying to impress, prove, please, or even explain. It's just you, breathing, listening, returning. And at first, it might feel hollow. But stay long enough, and you start to notice something remarkable. You aren't empty. You're just uncluttered. And in that space, there's room for the real to rise. That's when you start to feel the hum of your own consciousness again. The one that doesn't need external approval. The one that isn't tangled in identity games or trapped in reaction. The one that knows, without needing to convince anyone. And once you've met that self, once you've spent time in that inner stillness, you'll never crave the noise in the same way again. Watts talks about this with such clarity. He describes how so many people live out their lives as if they're on stage, reciting lines they didn't write, wearing masks they didn't choose, caught in a performance that's been running for generations. And you don't even realize you're doing it until you step off the stage, until you sit in that quiet dressing room, wipe off the makeup, and look in the mirror. That's when it hits you. You weren't being fake. You were just surviving, playing roles because that's what you were taught to do. But now that you're awake, now that you see it, you can't go back to pretending. And here's where it gets tricky, because the world doesn't always welcome authenticity with open arms. The world likes predictability. It likes roles. It likes people who stay in line. So when you start showing up differently, when you stop playing along, it can feel jarring. People might pull away. They might say you've changed, that you're distant, that you're too sensitive or too deep or too intense. But what reminds us, that's not a flaw. That's the cost of being awake in a world that's still half asleep. And this is why solitude becomes a kind of medicine. It's where you recalibrate, where you remember what's real, where you recover from the dissonance of being in environments that ask you to shrink or numb or distort. You start to crave it, not out of fear of people, but out of love for truth. And when you return to the world, because you will, you come back grounded. You're not a hermit. You're not hiding. You're just clear. You can spot the masks. You can feel the tension in a room. You can hear what's not being said just as clearly as what is. And you have a choice. You don't have to absorb everything. You don't have to fix or carry anyone. You don't have to perform. You just be. And that being, it has gravity. It has power. It creates space around it. Space for others to be real too, if they choose. That's how awakening spreads. Not through sermons or shaming or grand displays of wisdom, but through presence. Through one conscious person choosing to live fully, quietly, and truthfully. What's new this? He knew that awakened souls don't need to gather massive followings or shout from mountaintops. They just need to live with integrity, to guard their energy, to honor their solitude, to engage selectively and consciously. And here's a beautiful paradox. The more you honor your solitude, the more authentic connection you attract. Because people can feel it. They feel the difference between someone who's performing and someone who's present. Between someone who's seeking validation and someone who's already full. Between someone who needs you to fill a void and someone who's just enjoying the moment. It's magnetic. So if you ever felt like being around too many people drains you, overwhelms you, or leaves you feeling disconnected from yourself, you're not broken. You're probably just waking up. You're tuning into subtleties most people have spent their whole lives numbing out. You're noticing the emotional weight that comes from being in rooms filled with unspoken shame and unreleased fear. You're realizing that so much of what passes for a normal interaction is actually just mutual performance. And you're ready for something deeper. But that deeper connection, it doesn't come from pushing harder or networking more. It comes from going inward, from sitting with yourself, from building the inner strength to not need the mask anymore. And when you do, you walk into a room differently. You speak with less urgency. You listen with more presence. You're not trying to be liked. You're just there. Whole, awake, open, but boundaried, clear, but compassionate. And that, my friend, is rare and sacred. It's the kind of presence the world doesn't even know it's starving for until it finds it. So if this resonates with you, if you felt the pull towards solitude, the fatigue of performance, the quiet ache for something real, trust it. You're not retreating. You're remembering. And when you're ready to return to the world, you'll do it on your terms, with clarity, with consciousness, with a heart that's full, not hungry. And that, Alan Watts would say, is a true beginning of freedom. Take your time. Let the noise fade. Let the world spin. You're not missing out. You're tuning in. And from here, everything that matters will begin to rise. Here's what's wild. The more you wake up, the more obvious the unconscious becomes. You start to notice things you never saw before. Not because they weren't there, but because you were once too distracted to feel them. You're sitting at a dinner table and someone makes a joke that lands flat, but no one says anything. You feel the discomfort ripple through the air like a sudden drop in temperature. That's not paranoia. That's sensitivity. You walk into a workplace and everyone's smiling, but your body tenses. You can feel the undercurrent, resentment, burnout, unspoken tension held under polite professionalism. That's not overthinking. That's perception. You're in a group of friends laughing about old times, and suddenly you realize no one here really sees each other. Everyone playing their part, joking, avoiding, hoping no one notices how numb they feel inside. Once you wake up, you see it all, and there's no UN seeing it. That's why being around too many people, especially people still asleep, can feel like a sensory overload, because you're not just listening to what's being said. You're absorbing everything that's left unsaid. And Watts would tell you this isn't a curse. It's your capacity for empathy expanding, your intuition sharpening. It's your consciousness stepping into a new bandwidth, one where masks become transparent, where energy is louder than words. But with that comes a choice. Because once you become that tuned in, you realize you can't just throw yourself into every social situation. You can't keep saying yes to draining events, small talk, performative friendships, or being nice at the cost of your sanity. You have to choose. And that's where solitude becomes sacred. Not as an escape, but as alignment. As a place where you come home to yourself. Where you clear the static. Where you realign with what's true for you, not what's expected, projected, or assumed. Alan Watts wasn't promoting isolation. He wasn't anti-people. He was pro-awareness. He knew that if your energy is constantly entangled in the performative chaos of the world, you'll never have the space to hear your own wisdom. And when you lose touch with your own inner knowing, you start living reactively, bouncing between roles, expectations, and emotional landmines that were never yours to begin with. So he invited you to step back, to pause, to notice, to sit with yourself long enough to remember that you're already whole, that you don't need to prove your worth by being everything to everyone, that you don't need to entertain people who are only comfortable when you're dimmed down, that you don't owe your energy to environments that drain you simply because they are normal. What's normal is not always what's healthy. An awakening shows you the difference. You begin to understand that energy is currency, and not everyone deserves a blank check. You start to guard your time, not because you're rude or antisocial, but because you've seen what happens when you don't. You've felt what it costs to pretend, to people please, to shrink so others can feel comfortable. And once you've known the peace of being fully yourself in solitude, the chaos of inauthenticity becomes unbearable. But, and here's the part that Watts would really want you to remember, you don't stay in solitude forever. You just return to people from a place of clarity, not conditioning. You reconnect with the world not as a chameleon trying to fit in, but as a lighthouse shining truth. You attract people who meet you in presence, not performance. You form relationships based on resonance, not routine. And those connections, they are different. There's no rush to impress, no subtle competition, no energy games, just two conscious beings, present, listening, sharing space without agenda. That kind of connection doesn't require constant contact. It doesn't need approval or validation. It's rooted in being, not doing. And when you've tasted that level of authenticity, you'll never settle for less again. Here's what else changes when you awaken, your definition of success. It's no longer tied to status, applause, or how many people follow you. Success becomes peace. It becomes alignment. It becomes waking up each morning with nothing to prove, and going to sleep at night knowing you honored your truth, even if nobody else noticed. That's the quiet victory. And the more you align with that, the more you'll find the right people naturally gravitate toward you. Not because you chase them, but because you became a frequency match for authenticity. That's a paradox Watts always loved. When you stop trying to fit in, the right people find you. But first, you have to get quiet enough to remember who you are without the noise. So if you're in a season of solitude right now, if you feel like you're pulling away from the crowds, the chaos, the old social scripts, take heart. You're not breaking down. You're breaking open. You're waking up to a new way of being, one that values truth over performance, depth over distractions, presence over pretense. And that's a rare path. Not everyone will understand it. Some might even mock it, call you antisocial, dramatic, aloof. Let them. You don't need to defend your peace to people still addicted to their noise. You don't need to explain your solitude to those who haven't yet met their own silence. All you need to do is keep returning to yourself. Again, and again, and again, until you're so full of your own presence, so rooted in your own awareness, that the world can spin however it wants, and you remain centered. This is the gift of solitude. This is what Watts was pointing to all along. Not escape, but embodiment. Not isolation, but integration. Not superiority, but sensitivity.